good, real good.
It's Karen today. You look like you've clocked some miles since we last spoke.
Yeah, a few. I've heard they don't make them like me anymore. There was this other guy, though. Army infiltration. He wore a bandana or something.
I heard he finally retired.
Really?
Yep.
It's only me.
The gaming industry and Tom Clancy have had quite the relationship over the past 2 decades, with many games utilising the author's name launching on practically every platform under the sun. Between the various Rainbow Six games, Ghost Recon, The Division, and everyone's favourite Tom Clancy game, Endwar. Anyone? Hello? Anyone? There's plenty of games that give you the classic Tom Clancy experience. Dudes with big guns taking down bad guys. However, for many, one series stands out above the rest, and it's Splinter Cell. The stealth action series from Ubisoft, Splinter Cell is often considered alongside the Metal Gear Solid series as one of the best franchises of the stealth genre. Unfortunately, despite the incredible goodwill the franchise has, it's been nearly a decade since the last mainline Splinter Cell release. So we have to ask, will we ever see a new Splinter Cell game? Before then though, if you could slap the like then smash the subscribe, we promise we won't leave you in the dark. So then, let's start at the beginning, the first time Sam Fisher donned his goggles and started a stealth dynasty. The Splinter Cell series started out in 2002, launching on the PC, PS2, original Xbox, GameCube, and was even ported to the Game Boy Advance, if you can believe it. Developed in the Unreal 2 engine, Splinter Cell allows players to make better use of the light versus the dark when stealthing through the levels. In the shadows, main character Sam Fisher was incredibly hard to see, allowing him to strike. Players could even shoot out light sources to make stealth even easier, which might not seem like a big deal with today's games, but back then it was kinda revolutionary. The series continued with Splinter Cell Pandora Tomorrow, which launched in 2004 for every platform that the original game launched on. As you would expect with a straightforward sequel, Pandora Tomorrow introduced a couple of new abilities for Sam Fisher, including a whistle that could be used to distract enemies. Those improvements were expanded on in 2005 Splinter Cell Chaos Theory for PC, PS2, Xbox and GameCube, which featured a new combat knife, and maps were expanded to become a lot more open and freeform when completing missions. Arguably, Chaos Theory is seen as the pinnacle of the franchise by fans. Between main games, Ubisoft managed to cobble a solo outing for Sam Fisher in the form of Splinter Cell Essentials, which launched for the PSP in 2006. A stealth action game dropping on the PlayStation Portable made sense, especially with the success of Siphon Filter Dark Mirror and Logan's Shadow on the same platform. Unfortunately, Essentials was quite the critical flop, with many reviewers stating that the game fails to effectively translate the franchise's gameplay and controls to the PSP. 2006 also saw the release of Splinter Cell Double Agent, which is where the series really started to try new ideas, the main one here being a morality-like system. Sam spends the majority of the game trying to infiltrate the John Brown's Army, a terrorist organisation with plans to detonate various bombs, meaning Sam often has to make choices that put him into direct conflict with his NSA handlers. The game becomes a delicate balancing act, as you're trying to do bad things to fit in with the terrorists, while also trying not to go too far and upset the NSA. Intriguingly, as Double Agent was a cross-generational title, multiple versions of the game were developed, with PC, PS3 and Xbox 360 players receiving one version of the game, while the PS2, Xbox, GameCube and Wii versions of the game were completely different. Cross-gen games were commonplace then, but most offered the same experience with better graphics. Double Agent's dual versions were totally different. While the characters and overarching plot are the same, the way things play out couldn't differ more. After 5 Splinter Cell games in the space of 5 years, it'd take 4 years to see the series re-emerge once again in the form of Splinter Cell Conviction, which redefined the core gameplay of the series. By redefine, that basically means turn the game into a bit more of a generic stealth action game with more emphasis on the action, but we can't say that's necessarily a bad thing. Conviction was the first Splinter Cell game many played and many newcomers loved it, so clearly the transition worked in some ways. It certainly was a departure from the established norm, which might have upset the core fan base. Conviction's main gimmick was the mark and execute mechanic, which rewarded players who performed stealth takedowns with marks. Players could then mark up to 4 enemies in Fisher's line of sight to headshot in one fell swoop. It was a highly cinematic feature, but also an incredibly effective gameplay tool that made the game's stealth much more accessible and enjoyable. The last full game in the series, Blacklist, saw Sam Fisher lead his own clandestine unit on a trip around the world. Blacklist built on the foundation established in Conviction, improving the mark and execute mechanics so that you can perform it while moving. The campaign also included a host of co-op missions that saw Sam work together with a CIA operative by the name of Isaac Briggs. And that, as they say, was that. So, what's going on with Splinter Cell right now? Well, everything and also kind of nothing. To everyone's surprise, possibly even Ubisoft's as well, Blacklist would prove to be the last game in the Splinter Cell series, despite the open-ended nature of its ending. While the game reviewed pretty well, hovering around the low to mid 80s on Metacritic, the game failed to meet sales expectations for Ubisoft. Ubisoft stated they were hoping for Splinter Cell Blacklist to reach 5 million copies sold, but a few months after the game launched, it was announced that the game had actually only sold 2 million copies. Ouch. While we haven't seen a new game in the Splinter Cell series since 2013, we have spotted Sam Fisher turning up in a couple of other Ubisoft games, most notable being Ghost Recon Wildlands and Ghost Recon Breakpoint for a series of missions, Rainbow Six Siege as a playable character, Tom Clancy's Elite Squad as a cash machine, and even as an Easter egg in Far Cry New Dawn. Clearly, Sam Fisher is the linchpin behind a Ubisoft cinematic universe. Okay, that's a stretch, but it's clear that Ubisoft aren't willing to simply forget Sam Fisher's existence, unlike some of the other dead franchises we've covered on the channel. As far as Ubisoft is concerned, Fisher is still relevant and has a place amongst all the other Tom Clancy properties they're working on. Honestly, it's kinda shocking that he's not made his way into the Division in some way, tying everything together in a neat little bow. I mean, hell, why not make him a DLC character for Roller Champions or Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the game? I mean, seriously, why not? Give me a good reason why not. Come on. Fan support for Sam Fisher has always been vocal and enormous too, with fans reacting extremely negatively to the news that longtime voice actor Michael Ironside wouldn't be reprising the role of Sam Fisher in Blacklist. Petitions were even created pleading with Ubisoft to reverse their casting decision, and every time there's a Ubisoft conference at E3 and Splinter Cell isn't mentioned, fans get one step closer to burning it all down. It seems like fans are tired of Ubisoft putting Sam in everything but his own game. So, will we ever see a new Splinter Cell game? You know what? And don't get too excited here, don't freak out, but we think we will. Ubisoft, if nothing else when it comes to the games, are tenacious. They're still working on Beyond Good and Evil 2, Hyperscape, remember that? Nobody does. Rainbow Six Quarantine, or Parasite, or whatever its new name is, and Skull and Bones, projects that, by all rights, should have been cancelled a long time ago. Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh on Quarantine/Parasite, but for Skull and Bones, other games have been cancelled for a lot less. If Ubisoft's handling of Sam Fisher over the past couple of years has proven anything, it's that they're still trying to find a place for their precious Sneak Man to make a triumphant comeback. Ubisoft top brass have expressed interest in the past in developing a new Splinter Cell game, with CEO Yves Guillemot stating at E3 2017 that all the Clancy games are taken care of. It's just we have quite a lot on our plate at the moment. All the Clancy games are really coming along, so we are not forgetting Splinter Cell. In 2019, Julian Geraghty also made the claim that he was working on a new Splinter Cell game, but the claim was disputed by Ubisoft themselves. As far as a new game goes, that's the last we've heard. On top of that, Ubisoft and Netflix have penned a deal for the streaming service to create an animated series based on the Splinter Cell property, similar to the incredibly successful Castlevania series. John Wick writer Derek Kolstad is serving as the executive producer for the series, and while that doesn't necessarily confirm that Fisher is going to be checking into the Continental anytime soon, it showcases the reverence that the Splinter Cell name commands. Ubisoft have identified a winning formula in anime adaptations, and have brought on one of the people responsible for cinema's biggest pop culture phenomenons to bring it to life. While we don't think a future game's success will be intrinsically linked to the success of the animated show, a new game will happen regardless, we do believe that this series is a good chance for Ubisoft to gauge player interest in the franchise. If reception to the Splinter Cell series sets some new records for Netflix, or manages to exceed Ubisoft's expectations, perhaps that will force their hand. Splinter Cell and Sam Fisher as a whole is too good of a property not to do anything with, especially when you consider the popularity of the game's Spies vs Mercs mode. Honestly, Ubisoft could just repackage and release it as a live service game if they want to have their not all games will be AAA going forward cake and wash it down with a side of Splinter Cell is back, baby! We're not saying it'll be a popular choice, and it won't, but they could do it, they could. Whether the new Splinter Cell game ends up being a mainline release or just some kind of free-to-play multiplayer game that's just some bloated microtransaction-heavy mess, it remains to be seen. However, Sam Fisher has made a habit of striking from the darkness when we least expect it, so stay on your toes. So there you go then, just our quick thoughts on the Splinter Cell property, where it is now, where it's been, and where we hope it will go in the future. What kind of game are you hoping they'll release next, and what is your favourite Splinter Cell game? Be sure to let us know in the comments down below, and thank you for watching.